Well, hello. Welcome to Panama Baptist Church. If you're watching this on June 21st, let me wish every dad who is watching a happy Father's Day. We are so glad that you've joined us today. We hope you have a truly, truly great day. Thanks for being here. Our missionary friends in Portugal, John and Marilyn Rust, recently celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. Some of you guys know them. You've gone on mission trips there with us in Portugal, and you got to know John and Marilyn. Sweet couple. This was an extra special event because, as you know, Marilyn has stage 4 lung cancer in both lungs. God gave her the ability to be fully present when the church threw a wonderful celebration for the Ross there, and it was just a really amazing day and time for them. And Sylvia, the wife of their pastoral interns, Sylvia painted a portrait of John and Marilyn and gave that to them. Just a really neat gesture of love. Speaking of celebrations, we want to give a shout out to our 2 graduating seniors. Virgil Brown, congratulations to you. And Kylie Odell, congrats to you as well. We're proud of you. We know your parents are extremely proud of you. So congratulations. I would like to pray over you. Father God, thank you for giving these 2 seniors life. Thank you for placing them in homes where they heard the truth about you. I pray that they will always know the truth and that they will believe the truth and only the truth. I pray that you'll give them a strong sense of your presence with them, and that sense of your presence will comfort them when needed and will convict them when necessary. I pray that they will be a good friend to others and they will have good friends. I pray that you'll protect them from sin and that you'll protect them from the evil one. And finally, I pray that you would give them a passion for you. Father, I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Congrats, guys. Let's turn our attention to singing and worship. James, here we go.
God sent his son. They called him Jesus. He came to love, heal and forgive. He bled and died to buy my pardon. An empty grave is there to prove my Savior lives. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth living just because he lives.
How sweet to hold a newborn baby and feel the pride and joy he gives. But greater still, the calm assurance this child can face uncertain days because Christ lives.
Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth living just because he lives. And then one day I'll cross that river, I'll fight life's fight, no war with pain. And then as death gives way to victory, I'll see the light of glory, and I'll know he reigns. Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I lay my head, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You have led me through the fire. In darkest nights, you are close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. I have lived in the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. And all my life you have been faithful. All my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I will sing of the goodness of God.
Hey everybody at PBC. Just wanted to just put together a short message here and just express our gratefulness and thankfulness for the unbelievable generosity of the offering from this last week. It's just really humbling to hear the news of the amount that came in and know beyond that just how many people are praying and caring for us here at camp. Definitely has been a very challenging year so far, but we know God is still in control and we're trusting Him to guide us. We are excited that we are going to be able to still hold our family camps, and we're looking forward to those later on this summer. And Lord willing, we'll be able to still have all of our fall retreats, which is a lot of people that are planning on coming this fall and looking forward to it. So we're praying that those things would take place. So again, just thank you so, so much for your generosity. We're just really, really grateful. Thank you.
One day, Jesus was speaking, and boy, did he ever hit a nerve in his listeners. An emotional and eventually an irrational dialogue followed, not unlike what might erupt on Facebook in our time. Yeah. John chapter 8, verse 59 records how this crazy dialogue ended. Jesus kept his cool, but the crowd did not. It says in verse 59, so they picked up stones to throw at him. But Jesus was hidden and went out of the temple. He got away, but they wanted to kill him. Jesus was speaking to a crowd, and the makeup of that crowd is kind of interesting. Nearly all believed, everybody in the crowd believed that he had come from heaven. They'd reached that point in their belief, and they had several other accurate beliefs about Jesus. But most had not yet followed his teachings long enough to experience the truth of what he taught. And some were still pushing back against the implications of what he said. They liked some of it, but then there were other implications that they realized were going to be really hard to live with and hard to agree to. So What started this dialogue that turned to attempted murder? Well, it started because Jesus genuinely wanted to help them. And because he wanted to help them, he told them the truth. And he even offered to help them with this thing that he talked to them about, this truth that was hard to hear. But see, this truth, it required the crowd to admit something. To admit to something that they had grown accustomed to, something they had lived with for all their lives. And that's hard to do, isn't it? Now, I need to warn you, as we look at this same passage this morning and read this dialogue, you might find yourself getting perturbed. You might not like something that I say or something that I read this morning. Please don't throw rocks at me. Please. This might be one time when I'm really glad we're doing an online service. But in all seriousness, please don't throw rocks at me. Here's what I would ask you to do instead. I would ask you to focus on asking a question. And here's the question. Is it true? Is it true? You know, subconsciously, when we hear something, we usually focus on how does this make me feel? And I get it. That's natural. That's normal. But I want us to focus on, is it true? Ask that question and then answer it. So let's just jump into the text. We're in John chapter 8, starting at verse 30. As he was saying these things, many believed in him. Then Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, here we go. If you continue in my word, you are really my disciples. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now, when we hear that text, we don't get all worked up. I don't think any of you, listened to me quote that verse and said, oh man, where's a rock? We love this idea of freedom. That's what we're going to talk about for the next several weeks. We love that idea of freedom. We love to be set free. And so this verse that's extremely well known, you'll know the truth and the truth will set you free. I don't think that's where it went south for Jesus and the crowd that day. But it did create a question in their minds. When Jesus said, you'll know the truth and the truth will set you free, here's what they said. Verse 33, we are descendants of Abraham, they answered, and we've never been enslaved to anyone. How can you say we'll become free? Now, I think these guys realized that Jesus wasn't talking about political freedom. If so, they would have had to ignore the fact that they were slaves in Egypt for over 400 years. And then they'd been slaves of Assyria, and then Persia and Babylon. And they were currently occupied by Rome at the time that Jesus was having this conversation with them. So I don't think they were so silly that they had forgotten all of that. I think they realized that he was talking about some sort of spiritual freedom. And they believed that, whoa, wait a minute, we're descendants of Abraham. We believe in God. So we're not enslaved anyway. How can you say to us we'll become free? We're ones who believe in God. We have the right beliefs. We have truth. We know God already. We'd get it if you were talking to those pagans or those heathens, but that's not us. And so they asked him, how can you say you'll become free? Jesus responded, truly, I tell you. It's interesting in this passage, on more than one occasion, Jesus used these words, truly, I tell you, or listen, I'm about to tell you the truth. I'm about to tell you the truth. This isn't my opinion. This isn't just a controversial perspective. I'm about to tell you something that's true. So hang on to that. Jesus responded, truly, I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave of sin. Now, Jesus isn't saying that anyone who's committed a sin one time, that automatically makes you a slave to sin. That automatically makes you a sinner, but not necessarily a slave of sin. When Jesus uses that word commits sin, that phrase is referring to a pattern, something that has become a practice for us, or in our language we may say has become a habit. Jesus says, listen, I'm telling you the truth. Everyone who commits sin, everyone who's made a habit of sin is a slave of sin. We're going to grab 3 statements this morning each in pairs, actually. So 3 pairs of statements. Here's the first one of them. Sin enslaves us. Sin enslaves us. I know we've talked about this before, but it's worth repeating and reminding ourselves of this. Sin enslaves us. You know, it's interesting. Temptation promises us freedom by rebelling against restrictions. You know, temptation says the problem is the rule. The problem is the restriction. And then you need to assert yourself. You need to get freedom by rebelling against that restriction. Go ahead, do it. It was a dumb rule anyways. That's what temptation tells us. But it's interesting, when we do that, we don't find freedom. You know, as you think back over your own life, you know, maybe you're a high school student, and you think about the students in your school, which ones are the most free to do, you know, just daily life? Is it the ones who are constantly rebelling against the school authorities? No, those students are watched like a hawk. The ones who experience freedom are the ones who are not in open rebellion, the ones who are following the rules, at least for the most part. But temptation promises us freedom by rebelling against the restrictions. But then let's keep moving. What are some of the ways that sin enslaves us? I scribbled down 3 of them. The first one is sin creates addictions that enslave us, right? Addictions that enslave us, that's for sure. Sin creates addictions by taking advantage of our desires. You know, we desire enjoying food. Some of us desire that a lot. I, for one. We desire pleasure. We desire recognition. We desire acceptance. We desire approval of people. But sin creates addictions by turning those desires into cravings. It creates addictions by turning those cravings into something that we feel that we really must have in order to live well. You know, we just can't feel fully alive unless we have that. But here's what happens. You know the cycle. We increasingly crave what we want. But when we get it, we experience less and less satisfaction. And so we become even more desperate to get what we crave. And so we go after that craving. We finally acquire what it is we're craving, but experience even less satisfaction. And the cycle goes in a spiral down, down, down. And we are addicted because sin took advantage of our desires. Another way that sin enslaves us is sin creates habits, thoughtless patterns that are hard to break. I think I told you before that at one point in my life I'd gotten into the habit of lying. It probably started with one time just trying to get out of trouble. Or perhaps, I'm not sure, maybe it started with just trying to get people to think more of me. And so I told this lie. It was, you know, I exaggerated or whatever, I'm not sure. But I told something thinking that wasn't true. I told something that wasn't true thinking that somehow was going to do something for me. And the bad news is it worked that time. And because it worked, I started doing it more often. But eventually, I lied without even thinking about it, where it was just the natural thing to do. It was the first thing that came out of my mouth. I naturally exaggerated, or I naturally told lies in order to blame shift or get out of things. Eventually, I lied not only without thinking, but without wanting. And it seemed like it was almost impossible for me to tell the truth, at least on the first go around. That was a thoughtless pattern. It was extremely hard to break, a horrible habit. Another way that sin enslaves us is sin creates this cycle of behavior that destroys our belief that we can truly change. You know the cycle. You know, we face temptation, and eventually, maybe not initially, but eventually we give into that temptation, you know, so temptation moves to indulgence. After the indulgence comes a period of guilt. And to deal with the guilt, we make a promise. We promise not to do it again. I won't do that again. That was horrible. And we don't for a while. And then the temptation comes and grows and builds, and eventually that leads to indulgence. And that indulgence eventually leads to guilt and another promise. No, this time I mean it. for real. I will not do it again. And maybe we put up a couple little things to help us avoid it. But then eventually the temptation comes and it builds again, and then indulgence and more guilt. And when it comes time to make the promise to not do it again, even as we're making that promise, we're already knowing that, you know what, I'm probably not going to keep that promise. Instead, we begin to believe, you know what, I really can't change. That when we encounter pressure and opportunity to sin, I can't resist. Sin does that to us. It creates that cycle of behavior that believes that it's not if, it's when. It creates that cycle of behavior that totally destroys our belief that we can change, that freedom is possible for us. So in summary, eventually sin dominates us and forces us to do what we no longer want to do. And what do you call that? That's slavery, isn't it? 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 19 says, people are enslaved by whatever defeats them. Sin defeats us. It controls us. And so here's the second half of our first trio of statements. Slavery to sin is real. It's real bondage, and sin slavery is a real thing. Slavery to sin is real. There are numerous implications of that truth. For example, it's possible to be enslaved to sin and still look good to others. That was, I'm sure, commonplace in the crowd that Jesus was talking to. Perhaps that's one of the reasons they started to get so upset. They look good to others. How could I possibly, be enslaved to sin? Here's another implication. It's possible to believe in God and be enslaved in sin. That was certainly true of the crowd that day. They believed in God, and they were starting to believe in Jesus, and yet they were enslaved in sin. Here's a third implication. It's possible to be enslaved to sin and not realize it. I love this graphic that Mara found for us. It's really helpful. You see the people going from the small cage, shouting freedom. They're all excited, throwing their hats off as they enter a new cage. It just happens to be bigger. That happens to us, doesn't it? It's possible to be enslaved and not really realize it because so many things have got our attention, or because we've been enslaved our whole life. We've kind of grown up like this, and so we didn't realize it. Or another way that can happen is, let's say that we've got one habit and that we recognize as awful. Maybe it's overeating. I'll use that as an example that might be personal for me, right? Overeating. And I realize, man, that's ruining my life. And so I get really serious about beating this overeating problem that I have. And, I go on a diet and I start exercising and I start doing other things. I get other people helping me out. I'm going to the gym. I've got accountability. Boom. It's all working. And it works. It works. I stop overeating, but I become enslaved instead to my image, to losing weight, to feeling good. And every day I'm on the scale or something like that. That's a way that this could play out for us, to be enslaved to sin and not realize it because we ditched one sin and traded it for a different thing. We ditched one thing that we were being controlled by and traded it for control by something else. One more implication of this idea that slavery to sin is a very real thing. Your little sin might be a bigger deal than you thought. It might be a gateway to full-blown slavery. It's possible that the only reason that sin appears to be under control right now, manageable right now, is because, not because it's not a big deal, but because either the pressure, right, the huge temptation and pressure and belief that you absolutely need it, the pressure is missing, or maybe the pressure is there, but the opportunity is missing. The opportunity, the easy way to indulge is missing. It's possible that the missing feature, pressure or opportunity, is the reason that your sin problem is under control right now, the reason that it feels manageable, but it's not really manageable. And when pressure and opportunity combine, full-blown slavery is in your future. That's a very real possibility. Now please, please hear me. When I say these things, I am not criticizing. I'm not criticizing. I made the statement to somebody just this last week that a lot of my preaching is actually confessional. I'm not criticizing you. I'm talking to you about the stuff that I'm struggling with. I'm talking about my life, my wrestling. So I'm not criticizing, nor am I trying to make people feel bad. What I'm trying to do is help us to be ready for the solution. You remember last week I asked the question, who do you know whoever broke free by denying that they had a problem? I asked you to name somebody last week. I said, who do you know? Give me a name. Somebody who broke free by denying that they had a problem. Crickets. That's all we heard. Because there's no one. No one breaks free without at first admitting that there's a very real problem. A solution is not a solution until we acknowledge the problem. Let's jump to a different but a related topic. Here's the second of our sets of statements. Fact. Everybody answers to somebody. Everybody answers to somebody. Everybody is under someone's authority. Everyone will be held accountable. You know, it's crazy. Even Jesus answered to somebody. The only one who doesn't is God. God the Father, right? Jesus, though he's God, answered to the Father. Everybody answers to somebody. Now, this particular statement's not in the text, and I also don't feel the need to prove it because your own experience validates it. I think probably every one of us who's now an adult at some point during our childhood, or maybe as a teen you can relate to this too, you know, at some point during our childhood, we believe some sort of a statement that, you know, man, I can't wait until I can get out on my own and not have anyone tell me what to do. We believe that, you know, right now Mom, I'm doing what you say. Or third grade teacher, all right, I'll obey you, you know, at least on the outside, you know, that whole thing, you know, where the kid says, I'm sitting on the outside, but on the inside, I'm standing up, right? Right, because we all believed that, all right, fine, right now, I have no choice. I answer to you, I've got to do what you say. But the day will come when I'll be on my own and I won't have anyone telling me what to do. Those of you who are adults, how'd that turn out for you? Your experience is probably the same as mine. I didn't get rid of authorities in my life. In fact, it seems like I have even more. I've got a boss, right? I've got a lender who's telling me either you pay that mortgage every month or I'm taking your house. I've got legal authorities in my life. If I go too fast and I get caught, I'll answer first to a police officer and then to a judge. We've got legislative authorities in our lives. We've got insurance companies who are writing the rules for us, and so on it goes. Everybody answers to somebody. There are implications of this fact as well. First is this, that, you know, that unfair authority in your life will answer to someone. If you've got an authority figure in your life who's abusing their authority, or maybe they're abusing their power in some way, abusing you in some way, overstepping their authority, or being unfair or unjust, please know everybody answers to somebody, including that authority figure, and the day will come when that unfair authority will answer to someone. If no one else, they'll answer to God. Here's a second implication of this fact that everybody answers to somebody. Absolute freedom does not exist. Or stated a different way, autonomy is a myth. Autonomy is a myth. I'm defining autonomy this way: the freedom to choose to do what we want to do without accountability to anyone. The freedom to choose to do anything we want to do without accountability to anyone, that's a myth. I'm not talking about autonomy as in, you know, self-governing organizations or countries. I'm talking about this, I can do what I want and I don't answer to anyone. That's a myth. That's a myth. The old nature wants us to believe in that myth, wants us to believe that, we can have the freedom to be able to choose to do anything that I want to do without accountability. The old nature also wants to add another part to that and says, I want the freedom to do whatever I want to do without accountability and without consequences. So think about that. Doesn't that sound like the temptation in the Garden of Eden? The serpent saying, hey, you guys can be gods. Just like God. Freedom. It was a myth. And doesn't that kind of autonomy also sound like the fastest way to become a narcissist? Maybe somebody you think you want to be, but no one you'd want to know. Autonomy is a myth. Let's keep moving. The fact that everyone answers to somebody, though, does not mean that freedom isn't possible. In this text that we're reading in John chapter 8, Jesus offered freedom. Some type of freedom was on the table. Jesus sets people free. Let's return to the text and read it again. John chapter 8, verse 31. Then Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, if you continue in my word, you are really my disciples. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. We're descendants of Abraham, they answered, and we've never been enslaved to anyone. How can you say you will become free? Jesus responded, truly, I tell you, everyone who commits a sin is a slave of sin, and a slave does not remain in the household forever, but a son does remain forever. Verse 36, so if the Son sets you free, you will be free. Really, you will be really. Yeah, let me try that again. So if the Son sets you free, you really will be free. Here's our third set of statements. Freedom is possible. Jesus sets people free. That means that freedom is possible. We're going to want to study that. We're going to want to know what is this freedom that Jesus is offering and how do we get it. That's what we're going to talk about over the next few weeks in this series. How do we get this freedom? What is it? Freedom is possible. Let me try to bring this all together and wrap things up. Did you notice that Jesus has something true to say to whole groups of people, several groups of people? To those who don't realize or admit that they're in bondage to sin, what does Jesus say to them? Very lovingly, he says, hey, whoever commits sin is a slave to sin. Sin bondage is very, very real. What about those who are looking for a different type of freedom than what he's offering? I think to them, Jesus would say, I get it. You want this other freedom because you think you've got this other problem that needs a solution, and you think that that other problem is your biggest problem. But it's not. Jesus offers us freedom. He offers us a solution to our sin problem because that's our biggest problem, our most urgent, our most pressing, and our most devastating problem. What about those who don't think that freedom from sin is possible for them? What about those who could so identify, when I was talking about that downward spiral, those who could identify with that cycle of making promises and then breaking promises? To them, Jesus would say, if the Son makes you free, you'll be free indeed. You'll be really free. To those, Jesus would lovingly shout, freedom is possible. Stay tuned. And what about those who are chasing absolute freedom and independence, autonomy? What would Jesus say to them? I believe to that group, Jesus would say, very lovingly, but very firmly, autonomy is a myth. You don't want to chase that. You'll just beat your head against the wall. You don't want to chase that. To that group, Jesus would say, maximum freedom is found under God's authority. I love that statement by Andy Stanley, by the way. Let's wrap this up. I get it. We may struggle hearing these things that were said today. It's hard to hear your sin bondage is really real, and it's probably a bigger deal than you realize. It's hard to hear that autonomy is a myth. You can't have that. For some, who've lost hope, it might be hard to hear that freedom is possible. We struggle hearing these things. The crowd struggled a lot when they heard Jesus talking about freedom. And I get it. On top of that, perhaps it's even harder for us because we live in a culture that teaches us that if you don't like what you're told, just don't believe it. Just say it's not true. Ignore it. Make up your own reality. Find your own future. Find your own truth, your own reality. But instead of focusing on how these three statements make us feel, guys, I want to encourage us. Focus on this. Ask and answer the question, is it true? Is it true? Are these three statements true? Your freedom is likely at stake. I hope you'll answer those questions this week. And we'll dive in a whole lot more next week into the freedom that Jesus offers. Thank you so much for being with us. Hope this helps. Have a great week. See you later. Bye.